Hi, I'm Ryan Mathewson, Golden Harvest Agronomist. Unfortunately, in parts of Kansas and Missouri this year, we've had some severe drought. And so, with all of the dry weather and heat, really put us in a challenging situation. And so, what we're going to talk about today is how to recover from those droughts, some of the farming practices that we can put into place to reduce the drought's effect going into next year. Overall, we want to first increase our water infiltration rate, decrease our evaporation rate, and increase our water holding capacity. If we can do those three things well, it's going to really help us out going into next year's crop and set us up for success in the future years. First, let's take a look at this picture. On the left-hand side, you can see that the soybeans are stressed and taking the heat in a not a very good manner. And then on the right-hand side, you can see where the beans are green and still look like they're thriving. There's one difference in this line, and you can see it right down the middle of the photo. On the left-hand side, this was chopped for silage last year. On the right-hand side was combined for grain. And you can see what that residue had the impact on this field. So that residue, that mulch, kept the soil cooler and really held water a little bit longer and put that crop in a more favorable position. So this is a very good example of what happened last year can definitely affect next year. And so we want to keep this in mind as we go forward. So now let's go out to the field and check out the condition of our soil and see if we have any compaction issues. So one thing we definitely know is we want to make sure we have good infiltration rates. We don't have any bulk density issues with a compaction layer going into the next crop. And so the best way to do that is just go ahead and get out into the field and take a spade and just go ahead and press into the ground and just see if you get a resistance of a layer of hard resistance that's consistent throughout the field. Say if the field has been disked several times and or that similar 3-4 inch level of tillage, a lot of times you'll find a compaction layer there. And so that might be something that is necessary to address with like an inline ripper or something of those lines. We want to keep our residue on top as intact as we possibly can. In this case, we took it for silage, so maybe not as high a priority for this particular field, but we definitely want to get that addressed. And so if you're finding a compaction layer that's very shallow, definitely something to take a look at. If you get good penetration, especially if there's decent soil moisture when you're checking, you want to probably leave that situation alone. And so on the topic of tillage, we absolutely want to reduce tillage because that's going to destroy our crop residue up on top. It's also going to provide more soil to sun contact. And so, as I said earlier, we want to keep our soils a little bit cooler to increase microbial activity and overall allow our ground to heal up and get ready for next year's crop. Another thing that I get a lot of questions about is cover crops. So putting in a cover crop following our crop that maybe didn't go so well because of drought this year, how does cover crop fit into the mix? Is that going to be something that really helps me a lot? I would say that depends quite a bit. Some of it depends on the moisture we get going forward, but also what area you live in. So I think if you're within 70 miles of the Missouri-Kansas line and east, I feel like cover crops could be a pretty good play. As you go into western Kansas, I don't feel that there's enough rainfall to support a cover crop, and I think those cover crops will help or will hurt you because they'll respirate out some more moisture going into before next year's crop. And so I think as you move east, it can. I would not want you to overplant your cover crop. Keep your seeding rates low if you're using especially something like cereal rye that can be somewhat demanding on the ground. That's going to respirate moisture out of the ground, so we want to keep our respiration rates low, keeping our evaporation rate low on those fields. All right, now let's talk about next year's crop plans. So first, let's talk about acres that were harvested for silage. So this is a very tough thing for your soil. Getting harvested for silage, you remove a lot of residue. You also remove nutrients. So first thing is we want to make sure we replace those nutrients so the next year's crop has a good chance. We don't want to add any additional layers of stress going into next year's crop. And then I really feel like that's where wheat is probably a pretty good solution. We don't want to leave our ground bare for extended periods of time, and hopefully wheat will provide a little bit of coverage for us, and hopefully we can recharge over the winter and hopefully have a successful wheat crop. Now in that case, once we follow that wheat, we want to make sure we do not bale the straw from that. We want to leave that in place. And if we do an additional crop behind our wheat the next year, we don't want to maybe take another crop off of that field, another hay crop. So feed is a common thing that people will use after wheat. I think I would avoid that. I think double crop soybeans would be a good option, as they will help shade the row without being a high demand for nutrients, and you're only taking the grain off versus taking off all crop residue. Now for soybean fields, corn fields that didn't go so well, in those cases I would want to see that ground crop residue remain and probably really rest until the next year, and then either a corn crop or soybean crop following that. Corn crop, I would not push the populations. If normally that ground was planted at 24,000, I'd probably drop down to 22,000 plants per acre and give those crop a little bit more chance to thrive. And we've got all winter to kind of figure out what kind of recharge we might get over the winter time. But we do know that this year's happenings will affect next year, so we got to keep that in mind. So to summarize, we really want to make sure that we keep as much crop residue in the fields as possible. We want to avoid tillage, and we want to not demand too much out of our crop, especially in between now and next spring. Give ourselves a chance to see what we can accumulate over the winter time for moisture and recharge. And we want to remember how important it is what we do the previous year, how it affects our following year. It's really important that we don't starve our ground, and we keep stress unstacked off of it and make sure that we control what we can control. We can't control the rainfall, but we can control some of the management practices to put us in a better spot. With that said, everybody's situation is a little bit different, and everybody has to have a little bit different goals. So if you need help coming up with a plan and want to talk through, reach out to your Golden Harvest seed advisor or sales rep or agronomist, and we'd be glad to help you and put you in a better spot and recover from this drought a little bit faster going forward. To find out more information, please go to goldenharvestseed.com or reach out to your local representative. Thank you.